Hello, James.
Hello, strategy. We're back
So
once again.
I was a little bit late. I was a little bit late for this episode of the podcast, but we're here now, and we're ready to talk about this beautiful blog post that you've written. Yet another blog post,
Yet another
and this
blog
one's
post.
on metrics.
It is. I decided to do a blog post on metrics, and it was basically motivated by the fact that in a lot of the largest SRS communities, there isn't much focus on what I consider to be meaningful goals, meaningful end goals in learning. Essentially, I think, especially recently with certain add-ons like the heat map add-on,
Oh yeah,
things
for
like
Anki.
streaks, things like Habitica, like
Mm.
those sort of things seem to have accelerated a sort of trend that I think has been going on for a while, which is people in the SRS community generally don't use it to do I don't know, it's kind of like a subjective thing. Like, I feel like people aren't doing serious work, if you know what I mean. And that sounds like
Mm.
I'm shitting on people who are using SRS to study for exams or just study a language or something like that. And I think that's fine. It's just not the kind of content that I think should be idolized, or I don't think it's the kind of content that should be as widely praised as it is. I don't know. How do you
Yeah, I
feel?
mean, a lot of these, like, if you go to the Anki subreddit, let's say,
Uh-huh.
a lot of the posts on there are just things like, "Oh, I've got a 1,000 day streak," or things
Right.
like this, and it's like, okay, great, but what have you been doing on the days? You know, like you mentioned before that someone will set will set their goal as like one review per day, so that the heat map stays active. You know,
Right, right. It's
which
sort
is
of
you're just gaming it. You're just gaming the metric.
yeah. And these metrics, people don't see them with the sort of the same cynicism as we do. They sort of genuinely feel that they are the progress. They aren't just the indicators of progress. They are the progress
Mm,
themselves, if you know what I mean.
right,
I don't
right.
know. I just found that really frustrating, and my goal with writing the blog post was just to get people talking about it, because um, I really want to see like a culture shift in the sort of things people use SRS for, because hardly anyone uses it uh, to do the sorts of work, the sorts of creative work that I think it can be used for. Um, Most people just seem to see it as a tool for memorizing trivia, that sort of thing. Memorizing like um, just stuff that is as close to nonsense syllables as possible. It's as close
Right,
as
right.
to Herman Ebbinghaus as possible without being that um, without being that useless. So
Right, yeah. I mean, the thing is, most of these people seem to be doing it as some kind of. If they're not doing it to pass exams, they're doing it as some kind of status signaling. Like, oh,
mhm,
look at me, I've remembered all this trivia, you know? Like,
mhm.
I've literally seen people post decks of, like, 20,000 cards. They explicitly say, this is trivia information. And,
Right,
like,
right.
that's crazy to me. But whatever, if you want to do that, I guess that's up to you. But yeah, I mean, most of this stuff is just like signaling. You want other people to know that supposedly you're an educated person now because you've memorized all this trivia.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
all these gamification things.
oh yeah.
Apparently, people put like dogs in the
Oh,
cards.
dude,
Like,
puppy
what is that one?
reinforcement. Oh my
Oh
god,
yeah,
dude.
what is that?
I don't even know. I don't know. I literally do not know what the purpose of that is, or how it benefits you in any way. It all just seems to be these little ornaments, these little like it's like you go into uh some sort of five-star restaurant or something, and then you add all these little garnishes. You start pouring ketchup all over it. You have this amazing learning tool, and instead you just add all these weird gimmicks to try and make something
Yeah,
that isn't rewarding more rewarding, when you should just be focusing on like making the process itself rewarding, because otherwise you're just going to optimize for the wrong things, I feel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like that's such a fundamental difference. I think the fundamental difference is, which accounts for all these other divergences, is that learning should be pleasurable. And we've spoken about that, but if learning is pleasurable, you don't need to gamify it. You don't need any of this other stuff
Hmm.
because in and of itself, you're gaining value. That's it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I.
But the problem is you have to balance it with this downside we've discussed, which is that progress in space repetition systems can feel slow because it's
Mm,
so gradual, and you can often miss it because of how gradual it is, and so that's a problem. So you have to balance it. So I can even understand the urge to have these progress metrics, even if you enjoy learning. Like at some point, this was years ago,
mm,
but I tried to have a goal where I would make some number of items or cards every single day,
mm.
right? And that only works for a little while because what started to happen, I would just sort of look for anything, even not very useful information, that I could turn into cards. So again, I had gamed the metric. It turned from a potentially useful thing,
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm learning more stuff, to now I'm just learning useless stuff just so that I can satisfy this metric. So it was really a pointless thing. So even if you enjoy learning, I can still understand the desire or the inclination to have some sort of gamification or
Mm.
some tool like this to help you out a little bit. But I don't know, I guess on that note, are there some things that you think are useful progress metrics that are not abusing it or gamifying it or discounting the pleasure of learning?
I think there are. I mean, all of the metrics that I mentioned in the article, like in particular the heat map. I mean, the heat map itself is, while it's a crude measure of consistency, it's still at least a measure of consistency. I think the problem only comes when you stop seeing the metric as just a metric. You start seeing it as the progress. So you only optimize for that metric. So, like you said, when you start having the goal to create a certain number of cards, rather than having the goal of, I don't know, achieving something with your learning in the real world, then you only optimize for creating cards, and you just lose sight of the, I don't know, the intrinsically meaningful goal that you should have at the end of learning.
Right,
You know what I
exactly.
mean?
Yeah.
And I think that we sort of alluded to it earlier, but I think the ability to share the metrics um, online over social media, it's sort of accelerated their decline in value, if you know what I mean. It's sort of, I said in the article, like, it's poisoned the culture, and I think that's kind of a melodramatic and maybe a silly way to put it, but uh, it does seem to me that um, people see these posts of people who've been using SRS for a long time, like 3+ years. They have these long streaks. They have these beautiful glowing heat maps,
Mm.
but they never see um, any progress, like posts, any progress posts where people talk about how SRS helped them to create something valuable in the real world. All they see is
Yeah,
these metrics being used as an end rather than simply a means to the end. And I think that
right.
means that newcomers, they sort of get the false impression that this is what they should be aspiring to as well. And I think that, so with a sort of culture shift, if everyone, I don't know, if there was sort of a more of a push um, to higher quality content, in my view, higher quality progress write-ups, progress posts, examples of people using SRS in creative domains, I think that would really help change things in a better way. It really seems to me
Yeah,
that,
I
sorry,
yeah, go
just
ahead.
one sec. Yeah, it really seems to me that using SRS to pursue creative things is like the frontier. It's like the thing that people should be focusing on because it's the next evolution um, in the development of the technology. Really, that's how I feel.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And the weird thing is, I have occasionally seen posts on, let's say, the Anki subreddit again. I haven't been there in a while, but there used to be at least posts where people would say, what has Anki helped you do?
Mm,
And almost all of the responses, at least as far as I recall it, and maybe I'm misremembering it, but as far as I recall it, it was people saying, "Oh, it helped me pass such and such exam," or
Mm.
it helped me remember, all the capitals, or something like this, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. Nobody was really saying, "Oh, it helped me to deepen my understanding of some abstract concept," or whatever it is, which
Right. Right.
would be the ideal scenario, or it helped me produce this piece of writing
Mm.
because I was able to manage all my learning or whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously Michael Nielsen was one, and we're obligated to mention him, so I have to put that in there again. But he was one, and he mentions how it's very valuable for him, but there are not that many people saying it, and it's something we talked about before. Like, why aren't there more geniuses using it? But
Mm.
and another point you said, how it might seem silly to say that it's poisoned the culture, but I don't know that it is silly to say that. Some people might say, okay, progress metrics get you to use this software more, and the software is useful in that it helps you remember the things you learned.
Mm.
Unless you're learning complete nonsense that's actually harming you, it's better to learn some stuff through gamification than no stuff without gamification, right? Some people would make that argument.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's right, but it takes away focus from the fact that learning is supposed to be intrinsically pleasurable. Like, some people, when they're starting working out, and some quote unquote behavior experts or habit experts, they give people this advice. They say, "Oh, after you work out, eat a piece of chocolate as like a reward to yourself." And I'm thinking, what are you doing, dude? If you're working out and then you eat a piece of chocolate, what's the point? That's
Yeah.
not what you're supposed to do. The workout is supposed to be intrinsically valuable. And maybe
Yeah.
it won't be in the beginning, but it's at least supposed to be.
Yeah.
And, that's, I feel the same thing with the learning. It's like, if you gamify these metrics and if you have all these weird tools to convince you to use it even though you don't enjoy learning, then you're convincing yourself that learning is inherently displeasurable, and you're not going to do it for the long term, which is, as far as I can tell, what the actual point of these spaced repetition systems should be. I mean, yes, you can pass your exams and then delete your decks, but man, don't you really think you should use this amazing tool for something better than that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point. The assumption seems to be with gamification and eating chocolate after you work out. The assumption seems to be that after a period of time, you'll realize that the behavior you're trying to encourage is pleasurable in and of itself, and you'll eventually stop eating the chocolate. But it's not my. It doesn't seem to me that that's ever the case. You sort of need to, from the very beginning, be searching for a way, be searching for. You need to sort of be looking for how this activity is intrinsically pleasurable in and of itself. Otherwise, I don't believe that you'll ever get there, because I think this is really evidenced by the extremely high dropout rate of Superman Low, and I guess Anki as well. Like,
Mm.
I don't remember the exact figures. I think we mentioned them on the first episode, but something like, I don't know, 25% plus of people will drop out after the first month, and then it's just downhill from there as well. So you really need to.
Yeah, it's probably even more than that.
Yeah. I think it's a better strategy to encourage people to try and find the reward in the behavior itself straight from the beginning, rather than tacking on all of these like false rewards, all this fake learning. Yeah.
Yeah, it might actually really shift your focus as well, because maybe if you don't find some particular subject or thing interesting or pleasurable to learn about, there might be something else that you would find enjoyable to learn about. But because you're using the metrics and the gamification, you just think, I'm supposed to slog through this just so I don't lose my streak. So you never actually go looking for something more enjoyable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You can just get locked into this, depending on this gamification for as long as it lasts, and then never finding a way in which it can be truly pleasurable.
Yeah,
And
exactly. I mean, Yeah, go ahead.
So I just wanted to go back to the um, like people not using it for what we consider to be like serious work. Like
Mm,
I feel like there's two issues, and one of them is that people uh, don't have an end goal at all, and so
mm,
they just end up learning for the sake of learning. So there's input in the form of your flashcards into your brain, and then it just never gets released out back into the world. You never synthesize it and create something and put it back into the world. So there's never any output. And the second one I see, which is probably the most common, is like people see the exam as the end goal, and then and so they do all this work, all this input in the form of flashcards or whatever, spaced repetition. The output is the exam, and then it just decays into nothing because you stop using SRS, you stop reviewing your flashcards. You might even go so far as to delete your deck. Oh my god. I dread to think. And so it just never, I don't know, yeah, it just seems like the culture is stuck there. And
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I'll just make the point. Just because, okay, so it doesn't have to be something high level.
Mm,
We're not saying that. You don't have to. You can learn whatever you want. The
mm,
whole point of what we're saying is not, oh, only learn physics so you can help us understand the universe.
right.
We're not saying that. We're just saying you should enjoy learning because it's inherently pleasurable. For whatever reason, probably because evolution wants us to explore the environment,
Mm,
we find learning inherently pleasurable. So it's supposed to be fun. And if you're taking away all the fun from it, you're, in the terms of Wozniak, you're harming your learn drive, you're suppressing your learn drive, and that could have real negative long-term consequences.
mm,
So the whole point of what we're saying, you could learn about whatever you want. You can learn about celebrities. If you enjoy it, that's better than forcing yourself to learn about something, bad that you don't like. Obviously, if you have exams, it's a different story, but you would hope that even if someone were using Anki for exams, they would additionally use it for things they really enjoy, but how often does that happen? And how often are people using it to do things like that? I don't know.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I feel like it's gonna come across like we're just knowledge snobs sitting in I don't know, ivory tower or something, looking down at all the peasants.
Yeah,
But that's not.
yeah.
But to a certain extent, I feel like that's necessary. There has to be a certain level of um, opinion, a certain level of snobbishness. I can't just sit here and say that the current state of SRS is amazing because it just clearly isn't, and um,
Right.
it's never going to advance unless people start talking about the problems.
Yeah, and I at some level, I think it's fine for us to say, like, you really should be using this amazing tool for something better. And
Mm.
however self-righteous that sounds, it is what it is. It's just an opinion, I suppose. But yeah, I guess I'll just give another anecdote. Like, let's say when I miss a day of incremental reading,
Hmm.
I'm not sad because I ruined my streak. Like, I
Mm.
don't care about. I don't even think about that. I don't know that I've ever had a streak. I don't know what it is. I
Yeah,
don't think about that at all. I'm only sad because I go, oh, I didn't learn anything. Like, that's it.
yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's the whole goal. That's what we're saying. Don't make it something proxied for progress. Make it the
Mm.
actual progress, which is the learning itself.
Exactly. Yeah, I've started recommending to people that they hide the statistics bar um,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
in
the status
SM.
bar, yeah.
Yeah, like especially the outstanding parameter. Woz has got
Mm,
this good quote, like the outstanding parameter becomes a form of religion. If people
mm,
don't get it down to 0 + 0, then they feel like a failure. And I think and that's even in the absence of like sharing. Like there's not really a big culture of sharing the outstanding parameter or the number of cards you finish per day in the SM community, as far as I'm aware. Like
mm.
I never see those posts on Discord. I never see them on the Reddit, although the Discord and the Reddit are smaller than the Anki communities, so maybe that's a reason.
Right,
But
right.
it seems that even in the absence of that, people stress over it and they begin to obsess over getting the outstanding parameter down to 0 0, or they want to increase the number of cards or whatever. It started to make me feel like maybe there's something just innate within us that makes us crave the feeling of completion, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. People do the same with books. It's like people have this weird problem, and even Bill Gates has said this. He says he cannot leave a book unfinished. So to him, the act of starting a book is, he really thinks about it. He really considers it because he doesn't want to start a book that he's not going to finish.
Yeah.
There's something insidious about that. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, technically speaking, even if a book is good, it may be filled with stuff you've already read. So it's literally a waste of your time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really make sense. But people still have this crazy feeling. It's not crazy, it's natural, but this feeling where they have to complete all these learning things. And I guess the outstanding queue is yet another one where it's like, oh, if I don't get to 0, I'm failing it.
Yeah, it's one of like the most profoundly unintuitive parts, I think, of spaced repetition, of incremental reading. The idea that it isn't the goal to complete something, because you never really complete learning. It's a continuous process. You never reach the end.
Right.
And so the the end goals are the projects, the creative output you do along the way, but you're never really done. So it's better to focus on optimizing for those rather than, I don't know, these more arbitrary sort of milestones for completion, like finishing a book or finishing an article, things like that.
Yeah, or finishing your outstanding reps or topics or whatever. Like, to me, I guess in the specific terms of Supermem, the whole point of prioritization is so that if you don't finish everything, you got to the most important stuff first. If you got through everything, you wouldn't need prioritization. You would just go through everything every day. What's the point of prioritizing something if you're going to go through all your stuff anyway?
Exactly. So people start Supermemo and they only have like 10 topics in their outstanding queue, and at that point it doesn't make sense to even have prioritization. But a couple months later they start importing hundreds and hundreds of articles, and they realize that they're overloaded, and people begin to see this as like a really negative thing. Oh, I've got to stop the flow of topics into my collection, otherwise I'll never finish them all. But embracing overload is like one of the most important and unintuitive things you have to do, because it's like that reflects the reality of the world you live in. You're surrounded by information that you'll never have time in your life to learn or absorb or whatever.
Right, exactly.
You have to accept that whether that information is in your collection or not, you're still missing out on it. So it might as well be in your collection and prioritize, so that you can either search for it or it will come up on the day where the priority's right and the intervals are right. You just got to accept that. And I think it's extremely unintuitive, but it's also one of the beauties of Supermemo, really. Being able to, for Woz to have seen that and have designed the priority system in such a, coldly rational way,
Yeah, exactly.
It's really quite impressive.
There's some aspects of it that are crazy rational. It's like the numbers, it's reversed. So 0 is the highest priority. And he says it's because you're more likely to put in a high priority than a low priority. So it's just quicker to type in fewer numbers.
Exactly.
Which is that's just a funny thing. Yeah. But anyway, the point you made there about if it's outside of your collection, you're still overloaded.
Yeah,
it's yeah. Just because you didn't import it doesn't mean that's not something you want to learn. It's like, your room is a mess, so you shove everything under the bed. Oh, now my room is clean. Well, not really. It's like you're just deluding yourself. Just import everything, prioritize, and wait for it to come up. And if it doesn't come up, that means, you didn't have enough time, or it's not high enough priority, or whatever it is. But that's fine. As long as you're dedicating sufficient time to learning, and your priorities are good, then you're learning what you can learn, and you don't have this weird thing about, oh, I can't import more stuff because then I'll have even more overload. And I don't know, I just think it's worthwhile to abandon that whole, completion of the outstanding queue thing entirely.
I agree. I really agree. I don't know, there was this good quote I think Super Surgeon posted about a guy called Umberto Eco or something like that. I bet I'm screwing up his name, but it's something like the anti-library. So the books that you've read represent your knowledge, and then all of the books you haven't read represent the anti-library, the library of things you haven't read, and that's always going to be that's always going to be larger than your knowledge, and it's always going to be full of things that you would love to get round to if you had the time, but just because we're so time constrained, just because of the information age we live in, where we're just flooded with stuff constantly, you need to prioritize, and you need to pick those things that are essential to your future goals and whatever they may be. Yeah. And
and that's
sorry, you
that's
go ahead.
such a tough thing because, man, I try not to think about it a lot. Because there's so much stuff to learn, and it just kind of makes me sad that I'll never be an expert in everything. At best, if I do really, really well in life, I'll be an actual expert at 2 or 3 things maximum. I can't imagine it's more than that, you know. But obviously with incremental learning and all this stuff, you can amass way more knowledge than you could without it. I mean, that's got to be true. That's fact.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it couldn't be true. But when you look at a guy, let's look at a guy like Leonardo da Vinci. And I don't know if we've talked about this before. If we have, just stop me. But if you look at a guy like Leonardo da Vinci, he was a Renaissance man, and largely he was able to do that because anything he discovered was new information to everybody. Nobody knew. If he cut open a dead body and then drew what he saw, he just made a discovery because no one had done that before. So everything he knew was like new information to everybody. So he was able to be an expert in all these fields because the fields were so underdeveloped. There was barely any information. And I know that's an oversimplification. I'm not intending that as literally true for everything he knew. But the core of what I'm saying is the explosion of knowledge is wonderful. Obviously, all these fields are developing and there's so much progress and all these things. But what comes with that is just the complete inability to be an actual expert at many things in life because there's so much depth to all these fields now. And that's why you see these crazy subspecialties for doctors. Like a doctor will only do surgery on someone's left foot or whatever. It's like, that's extremely specific. But I guess you have to, because as our knowledge increases, you need someone who dedicates their whole expertise, their whole career to just that portion of our knowledge about the world.
I wonder if people will look back in the future at the times we're living in right now and say the same thing. Like maybe we're missing out on a bunch of great discoveries that we could be making really easily. Although
I mean, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case. It seems like a lot of scientific discoveries these days require like huge investment of time, money, and people. Like you have to have a lot of equipment to do to do research into like the fundamentals of physics. You need a large hadron collider and stuff like that. It's just it's not as simple as cutting open a cadaver or whatever and just drawing whatever you find.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then it kind of sucks too because it seems like scientific progress has slowed down. And that's unfortunate. I wonder if it's because of that. It's like as we discover more and more things, there's just fewer things to discover. Maybe it's as simple as that. But I don't know. I haven't done enough thinking about it. But yeah, just to get back to the core point, I really want to know if there's some intrinsic way to direct people away from these gamified progress metrics and more towards the enjoyment of learning. And if there's not a way of thinking that can be taught, is there something visual that you can put as a feature that would still add value that's not like a gamified thing that people would try to abuse in the sense of these other metrics?
I'm not really sure. When I was looking up how other fields deal with things like only focusing on metrics and things like that, I think maybe one of the ideas that may help is like having a bundle of these metrics and looking at like an aggregation of a bunch of them into one number, and then tracking that instead, because then it gives like a more balanced overview of
Mm.
everything you're doing. I think another good way is just like a cultural shift, as we said. Like if there are more people visibly doing the sort of work that we find valuable and sharing it on social media rather than the current situation, that might have an effect as well. Apart from
Yeah, it
that,
might have the effect of where it's like, why are you sharing just your streak when everybody else is sharing some creative output?
exactly,
You know?
yeah. I
Yeah.
think that might help. I
Yeah, I
had,
think the culture has a lot to do with it, but I don't know. That just seems like such a hard thing to adopt. I really want to know if there's a way of presenting progress or feeling progress
mm,
that's so gradual like this that would be sustainable for the majority of people. Because some people figure this out on their own. For one
mhm.
reason or another, they just figure out how to feel the sensation of progress, even in these gradual systems. So, but how can you do that for most people? Is there like a way of thinking? Is there something like maybe just I don't know, it seems simple, but what if you just tracked your time spent and you just tried to read more every day or something like that?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think I'm not sure how to solve the general problem of people not being able to like understand like the reward that comes from the actual process, but I feel like if people were able to track um, universally everything that they do every day, and they were able to connect um,
Mm,
sort of the rewards they receive from the real world in the future right back to when they started learning something. So they were able to track like the chain of causality right back through their life,
right.
right back to the start of when they downloaded Anki or downloaded Supermem or whatever. I think that would really help if it was possible to make the connection between um, the work or learning you do today and the payoff far away in the future. I think that would really help the whole situation. Yeah.
Yeah, that would really help. It just seems like an amazingly complex thing to do to like track every single thing you do,
I think
that
it's
kind of thing.
so possible today. At least, um, at least your learning, it's possible to track. I mean, since we do your learning and your work, since we're all basically knowledge workers, we're all part of the
Mm,
tertiary sector of the economy, basically, where we, uh, I don't know, sit down at desks and work on the computer all day, basically. It's so easy to track what you're doing, um, and I feel like you could just do that over time, and it's going to become easier and
yeah, I
easier with
mean
all of these
that
devices and
would be
stuff.
amazing, and I think you're right. It actually is doable. It reminds me of this is like sort of related. Have you ever seen that movie Transcendent Man? It's a documentary with Ray Kurzweil.
I know of Ray Kurzweil, but I've not seen it. No.
Yeah, so there was this documentary in 2009, and it's a really interesting documentary. If you're into that kind of stuff, or like futurism or anti-aging stuff, it's
Hmm.
really interesting to watch. But anyway, there's a portion of that documentary where he's basically talking about this idea, which he is fully confident will come to fruition, which is you'll be able to essentially revive human beings that have died, not by actually bringing them back to life, but
Mm.
by feeding information about them into some sufficiently advanced AI, and then that AI will recreate them. So
Damn.
his father died, and he's got like sheds full of stuff that his father wrote, and even things like bills that came in for him, like
Mm.
all sorts of details about his life. And he is fully confident, as far as I can tell, he doesn't even have a shadow of a doubt, that he will be able to feed this AI eventually all this info about his dad. And the AI will essentially bring his dad back to life for him. He'll be able to have a chat with his dad, as far as he knows. And I don't know, that just seems funny to me. What if you could feed the AI an earlier version of yourself and then
Uh-huh.
have a chat with yourself, and then you get to realize, oh wow, I know way more than this idiot. And then that would be a visceral sense of progress for you.
That's awesome. Oh, dude, there are so many cool things you could do with that. And the thing is,
That
it's
would be
not even
amazing,
like
dude.
there's not even some physical. There's not some law of physics that makes that impossible. It's totally possible with the technology we have today to record everything, literally every um, input and output from your brain, basically. I mean, what goes on
Right,
inside your brain is kind of a black box still, but in terms of
right.
input and output, like everything is written down, everything is recorded. It would be
Mm.
totally be possible. It would be so interesting to see like you feed all that information to the AI of your past self, and then you could run like I don't know different tests to see whether you could have come out smarter of the learning process. You could speak to a version of yourself where you used the puppy reinforcement add-on, and the version of yourself where you didn't, and then you could see which one turned out better.
Oh man, see, that would actually kind of make me depressed a little bit because imagine if it said you really screwed up your life. You could have been so much better than this. Oh man,
If only you'd used the heat map and the puppy
yeah.
reinforcement and the Pokemon thing. You would have been a
That actually
genius.
reminds me of something I read once, which is, what's your own personal version of hell? And someone said, meeting the person I could have become. And
Oh,
I
damn.
thought, oh man, that would be terrible. If you've somehow screwed up your life in a way that you don't see and you could have done way better, that would be kind of depressing to confront.
Brutal. And then you check their Anki profile and it's just full of those errors.
Oh man. But anyway, yeah, I think that like even just what you're saying, just without the AI, just tracking what you do,
Mhm.
there's probably something really fruitful that could be done there in terms of just tracking how far you've come.
Yeah, I mean, it really could end some of the debates about nature versus nurture if you tracked like a child's learning progress, literally from when they were zero to when they were an adult. I mean, you can make a bunch of interesting findings, I bet, and that's totally possible today. I bet there are people doing it right now. I bet we'll
Yeah,
find
what if
in
you were
a few
already
years.
an adult and you just started tracking everything you do? What are some interesting things you think you could do with all those data?
Um, I'm not sure. Honestly, with one person, it's not really. It is possible to do like self-experimentation. It's just, I guess it's slower when you're doing it with one person because you have to do an experiment, then another experiment to like see the changes. But if you can have lots of people all doing these experiments at the same time, maybe it requires sort of a level of sharing, I guess. With if
Mm.
you start as an adult, it's yeah, I'm not really sure. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. That would be a really interesting thing to do, but like you say, it seems like you would get better results if you had many people doing it. Like,
Mm.
so just to give sort of an example, I have a bunch of sleep data. I have an Aura ring, I
Hmm.
have a Dream headband. I do all this stuff for sleep. I wear blue blocking glasses. I use one of these sun lamps in the morning. I use the white noise machine at night.
Hmm.
I have Philips Hue bulbs in my room so I can turn them red after the sun sets. I mean, I have flux on my computer. I do all this stuff, but as far as I can tell from the sleep data, none of it helps me. And all this
Mm.
sleep data hasn't been able to help me do anything better about my sleep. And let's say there were a larger community of people using these tools to optimize instead of just observe,
Mm.
and people could give explicit tips. I've seen some tips, but mostly they're vague, right?
Yeah.
But if people could give more tips about, like, oh, I did this and then my sleep went from this to this,
Yeah.
in the same way, if you had this setup where you were tracking everything you did, people could say, oh, I do this thing and here are my results. It would
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
way more easy to compare and get better input and change your ways of doing things
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
better results.
I think there are a number of like interesting models for how you can get insights on uh, how you can get insights at scale from these sort of tracking tools. So obviously you have like the university research science method, which is um, obviously successful in certain domains, but the one that I'm more interested in recently is sort of the decentralized uh, participant-led trials, quantified self, that sort of style of
Mm.
tracking. I think if you were able to scale that up, keep it like rigorous, scientifically accurate, like do proper uh, scientific like trial design and stuff like that. I feel like that would be so powerful because I see almost the hints of the start of that in certain domains, such as in fitness. Like in fitness, it's really common for people to like bodybuilding and stuff like that. So people will create a program, they'll track lots of relevant variables about their life while they do that program, and then they'll sort of share that information with their viewers. I mean, some people even I'm talking about YouTube when I'm talking about
Mm.
this. They'll share it with their viewers. They'll even record the process. They'll record like quantifiable, comparable metrics such as their weight, their strength before and after, and things like that. I feel like that is.
Right.
What if there was something like that for learning? I mean, that would be so interesting if it was totally decentralized. I mean, it's not entirely scientifically rigorous because it's quite rare that these like programs are carried out in a really scientific fashion, but they
Mm.
are
Yeah.
extremely creative. There's a faster turnaround. There's the potential to um, do real serious scientific investigations over sort of this decentralized network. You know, so cool.
Yeah, or even if you don't do the investigation part, even if you
Hmm.
just want people to advance more quickly, like
Yeah.
if you look at some of the written up posts from the advanced fitness people,
Hmm.
it's like insanely in depth. You've
Yeah.
never seen anything so in depth,
Yeah.
and they keep, like you say, they keep track of every variable. They try so many different things,
Mm.
and they're so persistent with it, and they keep track of everything, and then they do this very long, very detailed write up, and it's amazing. And I've never seen anyone do a write up like that for learning. When have
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
seen that?
Never. Literally never. There's nothing like it at all, and there ought to be because I mean, it's totally possible, and it would be beneficial. It's clear that um, people have different strategies for learning, and some of them are more effective than others, and there just seems to be no interest in it whatsoever. Uh, Especially from, I mean, the like the establishment. There's nothing like that. Uh, like even
Not
these.
even close, dude.
Yeah,
Not even.
yeah.
You know what I think some of it is? Some of it is ego. It's like
Mm,
people don't want to mention all this effort they had to go to learn something because they want to be seen as smart. They just want to show off the end result. Look at me, I learned this. There you go. Whereas
yeah,
if
yeah,
you explain it, people might go, "Oh, well, you had to do all this stuff. Maybe you're not so smart." But in reality, everybody has to do that stuff. There are very few
yeah,
actual, brilliant people that don't have to do any thinking. There are a few, like
yeah.
John von Neumann is one that comes to mind, who
Right.
just appears. He existed in another universe, in another
Uh-huh.
realm. I don't know what sort of gift he got, but there are very few people ever like that. And even smart people who win Nobels and do things like this, they still have to do thinking. They still have to try. They still have to, have practices and things they do on a daily
Mm.
basis to get the most progress, So people shouldn't be ashamed of that stuff. And I wonder if that plays a role in why more people don't do these kind of detailed write-ups or dedicated strategies and applications of programs
Hmm.
for learning and then explain those.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wonder how it would change the debate on like whether intelligence is innate, whether it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, it just seems like all of that is testable right now, literally right now. No one's doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Imagine if everyone were Gwern. If everyone were
Yeah.
Gwern. We just scaled up Gwern. And we had all this beautiful data from everyone. We could learn so much about the world, dude.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah,
With current technology. If
with
you
current
just
technology.
self-blinded like Gwern does and you are committed to the rigorousness of the scientific method for yourself,
Hmm.
and then everybody, like you say, it was like a a mass scientific study where everybody contributes. If we just had a bunch of guerns, that's the key.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh, it's so interesting that the level of data sharing in those in like Gwen's self experiments and in the fitness ones, as we mentioned, is actually a lot higher, it seems, than in like scientific papers. Like they'll share
Mm.
details about their life that like go into far more detail than you can get just by reading a scientific paper. Often, that's what I
Mm.
find. I just find that so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me, and this will be an overgeneralization, so forgive me, but people make fun of bodybuilders as if they're some kind of morons,
Mm.
right? But if you go to these advanced fitness subreddits, or even if you go to the steroid subreddits, I've never done a steroid cycle myself, but just out of curiosity, I really want to know how these people evaluate the risks. So I've been to the steroids communities, and people will do these extraordinarily in-depth write-ups again about, oh, I tried this cycle, and here's what happened to me, you know? And
Mm.
it's like, these guys aren't idiots.
Yeah.
They're just wanting to get fit. It doesn't say anything about their intelligence. And it's really interesting to me that that community has way more in-depth write-ups and detailed, here you go, if you want to replicate my results,
Uh-huh.
here's exactly move for move every single weight I lifted, every single calorie I ate, every single hour I slept, every single cardio event I did,
Mm.
and every single steroid I injected. If you
Yeah.
want to replicate these results, that's exactly what you do, and
Yeah.
you'll have the same thing happen to you. Whereas nobody's ever said, I learned this. If you want to learn this to the level I did, here's what I did.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever said that.
And I feel like the potential is even higher in learning because there's lesser a risk of like overdosing or whatever, or you don't have to pay for your steroids. You don't have to worry about the negative effects of your cycle or whatever.
Right,
Like
right.
like pretty much at this point, learning is free, so there's no not even any sort of initial investment you need to do.
Right.
All of this is so possible. It's just yeah.
Yeah, the barrier is so low,
Yeah, the
and
barrier is
yet
so low.
there's not enough introspection or willingness to share or even advanced enough techniques.
Mm.
Maybe part of the reason people don't share it is because they don't have a technique. They just show
Yeah.
up and see what happens.
Ah, dude, yeah. All right, I think we should leave it there. That was a nice
Yeah,
point
I
to
think
end
that's a
on,
good
and I
ending
want to
point.
come back to it some point in the future because it's one of the things
Yeah,
that just
definitely.
fascinates me. Yeah, but
Yeah, same
this was a
here.
good episode. Yeah.
Yep.
See you guys next
All
time.
right. See you.